Buon pomeriggio a tutti! Bene, abbiamo mangiato?
Non vi sentiamo? Più forte? Adesso sì.
Bene.
Applauso!
Applauso.
Grazie Don Stefano.
Bene, speriamo che abbiate ripreso un po' di forze, un po' di energie perché ce ne sarà bisogno.
Eh sì, perché il pomeriggio che ci aspetta è veramente molto intenso.
Infatti nel pomeriggio ci
Okay,
lasciamo
we are
guidare da una
back.
testimonianza
So,
veramente
after
molto
an afternoon
particolare
of
e unica.
some
Una
spiritual
testimonianza,
sightseeing,
fede,
we've gathered back in the theater to listen to a conference on one of the newest saints of the Salesian family.
Un
We
applauso
will hear about Saint Maria Troncati, and we have Sister Lucrezia, who will introduce our speaker.
Trova qui con noi Sor Francesca Cagiano.
So our speaker is Sister Francesca Cagiano, who is born into a family with a long Salesian tradition. Her father was a very passionate Salesian cooperator.
Di Potenza e professa figlia di Maria Ausiliatrice dal 1990.
She's been a Salesian sister since 1993. She works in the South Italy province as a teacher. She works in the oratory, and at the same time, she is the director of youth ministry in a few dioceses in the south of Italy. For 3 years, since 3 years, she's been living and working in Albania. She was responsible for the Salesian Cooperators for 10 years. From 2005, she has been working for the cause of saints. She worked on the case of Father Felice Canai, who was a diocesan priest and a Salesian cooperator. In 2008, she became the vice postulator for the cause. And so in that way, she joined the cause also for causes of saints in the Salesian family. In 2009, the Mother General asked her to come to the General House of the Salesian Sisters to work on the causes of saints of the Salesian Sisters, particularly the case of Mother Rosetta Marchesi. And so she is the vice postulator for that cause. She was involved also in studying the miracle that was accepted for the approval of the canonization of Saint Mary Troncati.
Il titolo di postulatrice e dalla Facoltà Pontificia San Bonaventura la licenza in teologia.
Has a master's in dogmatic theology. She's a happy Salesian sisters, and she's very happy to share with us her thoughts, her understanding of the holiness in the life of Saint Mary Troncati, FMA.
Grazie Sor Lucrezia.
Thank you, Sister Lucrezia, and thanks to you all. I am delighted to be here with you to share the most beautiful quality of our Salesian family, which is holiness. And so I'd like to begin by presenting to you the official video on Sister Maria Troncati that was produced by the FMA Institute for the canonization that took place 29th of October 2025.
Lo potete trovare anche sul sito mariatroncati.org.
There is a website dedicated to Saint Maria Troncati in the various languages, so you can pursue that after these days.
Ogni esistenza porta in sé l'impronta delle proprie radici, i luoghi, gli affetti, gli incontri inattesi, le sfide affrontate nei primi anni non sono solo ricordi, ma tasselli fondamentali per il cammino futuro. Così è per Maria Troncati, l'indomita missionaria della foresta amazzonica. La sua storia comincia il 16 febbraio 1883 a Corteno, un piccolo paese della Lombardia, incastonato tra la Valtellina e la Val Camonica, a 1000 metri di altitudine. I suoi genitori, Giacomo e Maria Rodondi, sono persone semplici e concrete, abituate a scandire le giornate tra la preghiera e il lavoro, vissuto con sacrificio e generosità, intriso di fede profonda. Il giorno dopo la nascita, sfidando l'inverno alpino e la neve alta mezzo metro, raggiungono la chiesa parrocchiale di Santa Maria Assunta, dove la piccola Maria riceve il battesimo. La bambina cresce serena, in una famiglia numerosa, segnata dalla sofferenza. Dei 14 figli, soltanto 2 sopravvivono. Dal legame profondo con i genitori impara la fiducia nella provvidenza e la resilienza. Dalla madre, in particolare, apprende l'abbandono totale alla volontà di Dio nei momenti di prova e di apprensione. Matura così quella fede granitica che la sosterrà in ogni sua difficile situazione. Maria ha un temperamento vivace, giocherellona, allegra, decisa e servizievole. Ama pregare, aiutare i poveri e affrontare il lavoro con gioia. Molto vicina alla sensibilità di papà Giacomo, che la chiama affettuosamente il suo terremoto. A scuola incontra un'altra figura decisiva, la maestra Margherita Buila, che le insegna non solo a leggere e a scrivere, ma è per lei maestra dello spirito. La prepara a ricevere già a 6 anni la prima comunione, ritenendola in grado di comprendere e vivere il grande mistero. Verso gli 11 anni, mentre si trova all'Alpe, una nube si abbatte improvvisa, avvolgendo il paesaggio in una nebbia fitta. Maria smarrisce le caprette che aveva portato al pascolo, si disorienta e si perde. Cala la sera e l'intera montagna si vela di una coltre grigia, umida, silenziosa. Il papà e i parenti la cercano allarmati, conoscono i pericoli della notte e il temperamento pauroso della bambina. All'alba la trovano, addormentata presso un cespuglio. Le chiedono se ha avuto paura. No, risponde, avevo ancora nel cuore la grazia della mia comunione di domenica e non avevo paura, il Signore mi ha custodita. Nel 1893 la maestra Buila, non essendoci la quinta elementare in paese, la prepara privatamente all'esame. Le propone la lettura del bollettino salesiano. Tra quelle pagine Maria scopre Don Bosco, i missionari e le missionarie salesiane che lasciano la patria per portare il Vangelo ai confini della terra. Ne rimane affascinata, tanto da sentirsi profondamente attratta dal richiamo di quei popoli che non conoscono Gesù. Sente germogliare in sé il desiderio di consacrarsi al Signore. Sogna di essere suora missionaria tra i lebbrosi, ma il suo sogno rimane nel cassetto, perché si scontra con il parere contrario del padre. Divenuta maggiorenne nel 1904, Maria scrive segretamente a Don Rua, successore di Don Bosco, chiedendogli di essere accolta tra le figlie di Maria Ausiliatrice per diventare missionaria. Don Rua trasmette la richiesta alla madre generale, Suor Caterina d'Aghero. L'istituto è pronta ad accoglierla, ma lei deve vincere l'ostilità del padre. Il 15 ottobre 1905 è il giorno della partenza. Maria lascia con determinazione la sua casa. Il papà nel salutarla si sente male e sviene. Ma Maria, pur sentendo il dolore straziante del distacco, non si gira e non torna indietro. Giunge a Nizza Monferrato. Abituata alle montagne e all'aria aperta, si sente spaesata nel grande e organizzato collegio. È un tremendo sforzo di adattamento, ma la fede autentica, solida e il sogno di essere missionaria le fanno affrontare ogni fatica. Signore, voglio essere tua per sempre. O Gesù, ho lasciato tutto ciò che avevo di più caro per venire a servirti, per santificare l'anima mia. Sì, tutto abbandonato. Tu solo ora mi rimani, ma tu mi basti. Dammi tanto amore, tanto spirito di sacrificio, di umiltà, di abnegazione, per essere strumento di bene a tante povere anime. Il 17 settembre 1908 è il giorno della sua prima professione. È inviata nella comunità di Rosignano Monferrato, un piccolo centro in provincia di Alessandria, con l'impegnativo compito della cucina. La sua salute, già provata durante il noviziato, diventa preoccupante, tanto da dover essere trasferita nell'infermeria di Nizza Monferrato. Riceve la visita di Don Rua, che le chiede se vuole guarire. Suor Maria risponde con entusiasmo che desidera recuperare la salute per andare in missione. Pregano insieme 3 Ave Maria. Don Rua le dà la benedizione e le dice: «Se hai fede, alzati». Suor Maria si alza, guarita. Don Rua le profetizza che vivrà a lungo e farà tanto bene. Trasferita a Varazze, vi rimane per 10 anni per riprendersi bene in salute. E il 19 settembre 1914 può pronunciare i voti perpetui. Lo scoppio della Grande Guerra la porta a frequentare un corso per infermiere. Nell'ospedale militare è una presenza forte e materna per le tante giovani vite spezzate dall'inutile strage. Non solo medica i feriti, ma li accompagna con parole di conforto, spesso anche fino all'ultimo respiro. Non immagina quanto questa esperienza le sarà utile per la missione futura. Poi un'improvvisa inondazione del fiume Teiro. L'istituto viene travolto. La suora sacrestana muore annegata nel tentativo di salvare il Santissimo. Suor Maria invoca l'ausiliatrice e le promette: «Se mi salvi da questa inondazione andrò missionaria». Miracolosamente lei e Suor Chiara riescono a salvarsi. Finita la guerra, Suor Maria è inviata a Nizza Monferrato come infermiera e mentre una notte assiste una ragazza moribonda, Marina Luzzi, le chiede: «Appena vedrai la Madonna, dille che mi ottenga da Gesù di andare missionaria tra i lebbrosi». Marina risponde: «No, Suor Maria, lei andrà missionaria in Ecuador». Suor Maria insiste: «Tra i lebbrosi». E Marina ripete: «Lei andrà in Ecuador». Marina all'alba muore. Pochi giorni dopo, madre Caterina d'Aghero le chiede di andare missionaria in Ecuador. È il 1922, anno del 50° anniversario della fondazione dell'Istituto delle Figlie di Maria Ausiliatrice. Grandi festeggiamenti convocano a Nizza superiore e superiori da tutto il mondo. Anche Monsignor Comín, vescovo e vicario apostolico dell'Ecuador, che nel vedere la missionaria pallida e magra destinata alla selva non dimostra molto entusiasmo, sottolinea invece tutti i pericoli e le difficoltà della vita in quei luoghi. Ma il Signore ha i suoi piani. Il 9 novembre Suor Maria inizia il lunghissimo viaggio. Nave, treno e infine cavallo. La meta è Ciunchi, nella regione amazzonica, dove le figlie di Maria Ausiliatrice sono presenti dal 1912. Qui Suor Maria apre il botichin per curare i più poveri. La sua amabilità conquista immediatamente i cuori, sia degli indigeni che dei coloni. Dopo 2 anni, il 26 ottobre 1925, Suor Maria inizia la sua vera avventura nella selva, in una spedizione accompagnata dall'ispettrice Suor Carolina Mioletti, che vuole rendersi conto di come vivranno le suore, e da Monsignor Comín. Ascoltiamo il racconto dalla sua stessa voce.
Quanti giorni di sacrifici per arrivare a questa missione. Una grande quantità di chivaretti incontravamo per la strada, tutti vestiti di piume, tutti armati, quasi per spaventarci. Però Monsignor ci diceva: avanti, avanti, fatevi coraggio, suore, andate incontro a una grande visione. È troppo poco la preghiera. Per convertire i selvaggi ci vuole sacrifici. Avanti. Passano giorni e giorni nella fitta selva. Fiumi. Però un momento di scoraggiamento mi venne e dico: però Monsignore, dove ci porta per interrarci vive? Sono già tanti giorni che camminiamo in questa foresta che ancora non vediamo. Avanti, Offriamo al Signore i nostri sudori, offriamo al Signore questi sacrifici. Avanti, c'è una grande missione. Sono molti selvaggi che non conoscono il Signore. Ci vuole sacrifici.
Durante il terribile viaggio, la comitiva si imbatte in un gruppo di 80 guerrieri Shuar. Il loro capo esige che Suor Maria guarisca la figlia, gravemente ferita al braccio. In caso contrario, nessuno dei missionari sarebbe rimasto vivo. Incoraggiata da Monsignor Comin, con l'aiuto di un semplice temperino e la preghiera incessante di tutta la comitiva, Suor Maria riesce ad estrarre la pallottola. Conquista gli Shuar, che ora la considerano la guaritrice più grande di qualsiasi stregone. E così l'avventuroso viaggio può proseguire e si conclude finalmente il 4 dicembre.
Arrivati a Macas, dopo un mese di viaggio, entriamo in una capanna. Monsignor Comin, ecco il vostro campo, sorelle. Ma non si capiva niente in questo momento. Era una tristezza che non si poteva vivere. Guardavamo intorno, solo foresta, solo un'oscurità. Con Signore, però che facciamo qui noi? Non potremo mai far nulla con questi selvaggi che non possiamo neanche avvicinarli, perché basta guardarli perché fuggono, perché scappano, perché si arrampicano nelle piante. Non importa. Offrite il vostro sacrificio. Io mi accontento se in un anno voi potrete insegnare a uno solo di questi il segno della Santa Croce.
Si prega, si soffre, si invoca l'auxiliatrice e finalmente arriva la prima bambina e poi un'altra. Piano piano la dimora delle suore si espande per accogliere bambini, neonati disabili condannati a morte, donne maltrattate, ragazze madri. Si arriva a celebrare il primo matrimonio cristiano tra due sposi che si scelgono liberamente, senza imposizione dei genitori. Suor Maria allestisce un ambulatorio, immediatamente affollato da gente povera, ridotta a una stentata sopravvivenza. Diventa la madresita buena che accoglie tutti, coloni e Shuar, pronta a recarsi ovunque, giorno e notte, anche attraversando il fiume Upano, in canoa o a guado. La sua valigetta di pronto soccorso e la corona del rosario sono gli strumenti che curano non solo il corpo, ma anche l'anima. Io vi do le medicine, ma chi vi cura è la Madonna. Il suo lavoro è una lenta, paziente tessitura di riconciliazione tra due popoli, segnati da anni di conflitti. Gli Shuar sfruttati dai coloni e i coloni timorosi del risveglio degli Shuar, che l'istruzione potrebbe rendere consapevoli dei loro diritti. Inserisce le prime 2 bambine Shuar nella scuola frequentata solo da figlie di coloni, un potente segno di pace. Un'attenzione particolare riserva alle giovani donne, forma infermiere cristiane, capaci di unire alla cura del corpo la formazione della persona, riconosciuta nella sua dignità. A Suor Maria viene affidata anche la missione di Sukua, dove dal 1947 rimane stabilmente. Promuove la costruzione di un ospedale che viene affidato alla sua direzione. Una notte viene incendiata la missione salesiana. È tutto da ricostruire. Gli Shuar impugnano le armi e si ribellano. Suor Maria interviene, l'unica che può parlare al cuore dei ribelli. Vi abbiamo insegnato ad amare e a perdonare le offese. Se veramente mi volete bene, deponete le armi ai miei piedi. E le obbediscono. Ma Suor Maria è ancora preoccupata. Sarei molto contenta di poter offrire la mia vita perché torni la pace. E la sua missione si arresta bruscamente il 25 agosto 1969. Il piccolo aereo diretto a Quito precipita poco dopo il decollo. Suor Maria muore sul colpo, ma rimane viva, indelebile, nei cuori e nella storia del suo popolo, che piange non solo una missionaria, ma una madre, la madresita buena, l'artigiana di riconciliazione e di pace.
Bene, allora abbiamo iniziato veramente
Okay, so we have begun rather solemnly this moment of reflection. What I was saying before was that it's a tremendous joy for me to share with the Salesian family this exceptional person that is Saint Maria Troncati, which Don Fabio says in the Strena, she is a woman who has sojourned her entire life in the fire of God's love, living an educative love in the Salesian spirit in extravagant proportions.
Vedete, il titolo iniziale del mio intervento è La
My
fede
talk is called The Apostolic Faith of Saint Maria Troncati. And as a subtitle, we have Maria Troncati, the saint who saw God and served him with joy. And so I'd like to share a little bit my thoughts on this great saint. I read the Rector Major Strena, and I found it to be a rich treasure trove of so many treasures. Made me think about this. Every person has a precious resource of treasures inside. And I applied this to Saint Maria Troncati, who I have been knowing deeper and deeper over 4 years. Something she said strikes me. In a letter written to her family, she said, "But God has given me so much courage. He will never abandon me. I feel God very close to me. Jesus makes himself felt in the senses." Elsewhere, regarding the Blessed Mother, she says, "I sent the Blessed Mother helping me in all things." And so I asked myself, this feeling in the senses, the presence of Jesus, was it just something to say, or was there something really concretely that she was expressing? And so I did some research on Sister Troncati into her experiences where she felt the concrete physical presence of Jesus. And then in the Strena, there were lines that really embraced well some of her own thoughts. For example, Lumen Fidem that says, "Faith grows from the encounter with the living Christ, the living God. The Virgin Mary helps me in all things." And so Sister Maria Troncati, reading her in the light of the Strena, she lived her life in the light of the living God whom she experienced concretely in a nuptial relationship, in just like as the feast of the wedding of Cana. And so contemplating Saint Maria Troncati allows us to go deep into her experience of mission life as a path of holiness. So many young people don't have words to express their search for God, but we need to also sustain our preoccupation, our truth, that we can offer them a genuine life of faith. My talk is organized around 6 points. If you fall asleep, don't worry, I'll notice.
Tagliare di qua di là, ma comunque sono dei paragrafi molto brevi.
The paragraphs are short. Let's get into it. The first part is called A Life of Apostolate Illuminated by Faith.
La terza è le radici della sua fede.
The second is From Do what he tells you to, vamos. Third, the roots of her faith in the living Christ. Fourth, faith in the living Christ and his mediations. 5, recognizing in faith the first steps of living Jesus. And finally, young people, mediation and encounter with the living Christ.
La vita di Santa Maria, allora,
the first of my 6 sections, a life of apostolate illuminated by faith.
di apostola illuminata dalla fede. Come vedete ho messo le fotografie storiche ma anche le immagini
We will see graphically, for those following live,
in filigrana della fede di
images, photographs of her, and also some lines of her writing, her handwriting.
La vita di Santa Maria Troncati.
The life of Saint Maria Troncati, FMA, originally from Brescia in Italy, missionary in Ecuador from 1922 to 1969, among the Shuar and the settlers of the Amazonian East, was a life of a believer who devoted herself entirely to the evangelizing and educational mission of the Salesian charism, bringing the good news of faith to the frontier land of the eastern Amazon.
In quella terra di frontiera,
Having completed a course as a Red Cross nurse in Varazze, Italy during the First World War, she was sent on mission in 1922 by Mother Caterina Daguerro and became the doctor of the villages.
Viene inviata nel 1922 in missione da Madre Caterina Daguerro e divenne la dottora dei villaggi che evangelizzò.
She offered her patients evangelization through her motherhood and unconditional service.
La sua dedizione senza
Her dedication without limits, so much so they called her the Good Mother, Madrecita Buena. And this photo from 1930, you see Sister Maria holding a little baby who was spared from death. We see her very maternal in her gaze and her manner of holding this little baby. This attentiveness, motherly love, won her the hearts of 2 ethnic groups in the area who were at odds with each other over different feuds over the land. Her self-sacrifice, rooted in faith, allowed her to speak of dignity, Christian life, fraternity, forgiveness, and the new wine of the gospel in those places where everything was lacking. Jesus, the Virgin Mary, servants, empty jars, water. Due to revenge, witchcraft, and the killing of deformed or unwanted children, the mistreatment of women, particularly among the Shuar, moreover, the opposition between the headhunters, neither the Incas nor the Spanish had managed to conquer them because of their belligerence, and the white settlers was of the order of the day. After a life of total self-giving, of daily physical and spiritual care, of promoting the dignity of the indigenous people, at a time of renewed and particularly strong revenge between the 2 peoples, whom she considered her children, she offered herself as a victim for their reconciliation. A few days later, she died in a plane crash, August 25, 1969. On the day of her funeral, a large rainbow appeared in the sky as if to indicate and confirm that her offering had been accepted. The 2 peoples, knowing of her offering, understood that the sacrifice of their Madrecita Buena was a new force for renewed brotherhood and mutual understanding between the 2 tribes. Part 2. From do whatever he tells you to vamos. This vamos was an expression that she liked to use whenever she was called to go and bring any kind of help, medical or otherwise, to those in need. And so when we see that word vamos in terms of the strena, we pass from obedience to God, expressed as vamos, actively going, vamos. Hers was a life that was undoubtedly lived in the light of this year's strena. Do whatever he tells you, believers free to serve. A life that unfolded in the dynamic that emerges from this first sign of Jesus, faith freedom, and service.
Possiamo accostare la
We can
Nuova
compare Sainta Maria to the Virgin Mary. Like her, she is not indifferent to the lack of the wine of life and respect for human dignity.
E come lei
And like her, she asks Jesus, with her firm faith and ceaseless prayer, to intervene while she herself takes action.
la vediamo come serva
We
fedele.
see her as a faithful and happy servant who listens to Mary's command to the servants, do whatever he tells you, and freely and confidently presents to Jesus the empty jars of the difficult mission, sure that God will perform the miracle of lasting peace and a reinvigoration of Christian life among these tribal peoples. We see her rooted in faith, present on that quote-unquote third day of the wedding mentioned in John's Gospel, that is, within the story where Jesus, with whom she had an all-encompassing relationship, when his hour came, showed himself to be the living and working Son of God.
Vivente e operante, no? La frase iniziale, lo sentivo sensibilmente. Gesù vivente ed operante. Ed ancora, ad imitazione della Madonna, Suor Maria diventa serva del regno, il cui vino buono.
In this way, Maria becomes servant of the kingdom, whose good wine had to be a generous gift, because it was not for herself, but a gift to be shared to the last drop in her work and prayers for her quote-unquote fellow travelers.
A una signora, Ioana Jaramillo,
Certain Juana Presidia Valeriala claims to have heard Sister Maria communicate with the indigenous people as possible. Come, come, I am here. And handing them a small image of Mary, Help of Christians, she said, I will treat you with remedies, but the real cure will come from Mary, Help of Christians. Here is the prayer, pray it every day. As an elderly woman and Sister Maria could no longer go among the Shuar people, another sister, Felisa, attested to what Sister Maria said. One time she said, I can no longer walk through the jungle. In that case, I send my poor Hail Marys to the Shuaras, so that the Virgin Mary may give them the strength to live Christian lives.
Terzo punto.
Third point, the roots of her faith in the living Christ.
La storia.
History, as the text of the Strena states,
sopra i servi, no? Il senso del servizio e della disponibilità. La storia, come afferma il testo della Strenna, era per lei uno scrigno.
History, as the Strena states, was for Maria the treasure chest revealing God's action, calling her, showing herself, speaking to her, asking her for obedience, urging her to an ever more conscious and trusting adherence, leading her to generous service as a believer. From childhood, she felt that God was at work and was close by. A paradigmatic episode allows us to grasp in part the immeasurable grace of her relationship with God, whom she experienced as a living presence, working with her, for her, and in her. Baptized the day after her birth, on February 17, 1883, Maria was confirmed 3 years later, and she was able to receive First Holy Communion while still in her first year of primary school.
Poter ricevere la comunione già durante la prima classe elementare.
This encounter marked a decisive stage in her spiritual life. Her sister Caterina stated that she could receive communion 3 times a week and had received it when she was allowed to. But she was present at the Eucharist every day. Around the age of 10, while carrying water to the hut to make polenta, a cloud suddenly descended and she lost sight of her goats. She was a shepherdess in the mountains at home. Maria tried to find the flock, but disoriented in the dark fog, she got lost. All her family members went out to look for her because they knew the dangers of the night and her fearful nature. They found her at dawn, asleep near a bush. When her father woke her up, she smiled serenely. "Were you afraid?" he asked her. "No." Serenely, she said, "I had the grace of my Sunday communion still within me, and I wasn't afraid. The Lord protected me. When I realized I was lost and I could not see anything, I just laid down here. I found my prayers, I said my prayers, and asked my guardian angel to look for the goats." So this passage of hers conveys her sense of the living presence of Christ right beside her to guide her. This experience then reveals that Jesus in the Eucharist was not far away, but alive in her as a source of protection and comfort. Pausing in prayer with communion in her hearts before that bush, like Moses, who, while tending Jethro's flock, perceived the presence of God in the bush that burned without being consumed. This comparison allows us to understand how, for Maria too, just like Moses, there was a theophany, a revelation of God's presence, a sacred place of revelation of the living, active God, keeping her company. Who knows how many times, as an adult, in the solitude of the forest, under the starry sky, amid the disturbing cries of birds, breaking the deep silence and the frightening hissing of snakes, how many times Maria felt in her heart the living presence of Jesus who watched over her. Regarding this tangible presence of God, who she felt close by, and the constant help of Mary, help of Christians, in another sworn statement, Sister Domenica Barale says this:
In un'altra dichiarazione giurata si legge:
The first years of the mission were spent with young people from the oratory who had no interest in education. They were accustomed only to working in the fields, without any culture or education, incapable of conversation, and anything was reduced to yes or no, and they showed signs of not understanding. The grace of God, she said, began to work in me and in them. I felt a great strength coming from God. I felt Him close to me, and I felt Our Lady helping me in everything.
All'inizio della sua vita spirituale Dio è presente e si fa sentire. C'è in Maria fin
At the beginning of her spiritual life, then, God was present and made His presence felt. From an early age, Maria had a strong awareness of God. Part 3. Faith in the living Christ and His mediations. Spiritual theology enlightens us by stating that in order to grow in faith, prayer, and meditation are the fundamental elements, as they generate a progressive communion with God and lead to an ever greater understanding of the divine mysteries and the mind of Christ. Even the liturgy and the sacraments also constitute the mediation through which the Lord reveals Himself and speaks to the depths of the human heart. In addition to prayer, however, there are other mediations through which man can understand the will of God and do whatever He tells you. Given that Jesus is the mediator par excellence, God will reach human beings through various channels: sacred scripture, the church, society, events, people, and spiritual direction. During those years of Maria's childhood, God's will manifested itself through the providential mediations of the Salesian Bulletin, used as supplementary reading material by her teacher Bulla, and as a means of learning about different countries and places. Through the Salesian Bulletin, she learned names that would become familiar to her: Don Bosco, Don Rua, Mother Mazzarello, the Salesians, Daughters of Mary Christians, the missions. All of this making the experience of Jesus more alive in her, drawing her to those who live in the shadow of death in Brazil, Patagonia, and Ecuador. All this gave rise to her desire to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. At the age of 15, she was accompanied on her journey of faith formation by a parish priest, who later died with a reputation for holiness, Bishop Testini, who suggested that she become a daughter of Mary, Help of Christians. The demanding rule required her to live the gospel radically, and Maria agreed to join with a desire to consecrate herself to God, to be wholly His. In fact, she read in the testimonies, she said that we are not made for the world. She feared that she would not be saved. She dreamed of being a missionary sister among savages or lepers. She revealed her vocation to her parents, but her father would have nothing of that, so she had to wait until she became a legal adult. Maria's generous freedom and desire to serve God in Salesian missionary expedition prevailed over the dynamics of faith. She left for Nizza Monferrato on October 15th, 1905. She was 22.
La spaziosità delle montagne della Val Camonica, vediamole. E pertanto patì per il passaggio brusco da una vita all'aria aperta ad una casa formativa.
So her transition from the countryside she was used to the structured life of the Institute of the Salesian Sisters was a tough transition. She had to make a huge force to adjust. She was just a simple farm girl from the mountains, now living in a highly structured educational environment. Her pastor intervened. Her pastor remembers her courage and determination. Maria evoked the assistance of Mary, help of Christians, and prayed novena prayers to Saint John Bosco.
Del piano di Dio che lavorava nell'orto, disse alla madre generale: non mandatela a casa, sarà una brava missionaria.
Another sister told Mother General regarding Maria, don't send her home because she will be a good missionary. And so we see the plan of God becoming concrete through various persons. Jesus was speaking to her and through her, through the sister Pellegrina, who accompanied her in her maturing journey of faith.
E si liberò del peso che l'opprimeva, proprio come quella notte in cui si era persa, e si liberò della paura confidando ancora una volta nel Gesù che portava nel cuore. Difatti, superata la crisi,
strengthened by faith and enlightened by the Word of God and the Eucharist, Maria entered the novitiate, and the kitchen nun immediately understood that Maria, from the very beginning of her formation, was wholly devoted. She had overcome the crisis of the early experience and was fully committed to her formation as a religious. Maria was appreciated for being constantly in prayer. If they wanted to draw graces from the heart of Christ, they would go to her. However, her health began to falter again. Persistent headaches, loss of appetite, insomnia, and a skin infection which disfigured her face. So she made her first profession with conditions. The condition was, if her health was not restored within a year, she would have to return home. And so she was assigned to the kitchen of the monastery of the Salesian house in Nizza Monferrato, and that's where she met Father Rua. The mission dream, however, seemed to be getting further and further away. She was transferred to the infirmary in Nizza Monferrato, and it was there that she meets Father Rua, who was visiting the house. He asked her to pray to Mary, help of Christians, and to Don Bosco, asking for a miraculous healing. Indeed, Maria was miraculously healed. And this is a very extraordinary event of God's particular intervention in her life in a concrete way. Maria had seen God, she had felt Him beside her, and her confidence in Him only got stronger. And so she was prepared then to go to Varazze and give herself generously to Salesian life, learning the art of being a nurse that allowed her to heal people's souls by treating their physical wounds. This specialization became fundamental to her mission in Ecuador. It also is evidence. We see it at the heart of her experience of faith, freedom, and service, which were the hallmarks of her life's journey. To a young missionary, Sister Agnes Pagarano, who had arrived in the poor mission in Sucua, Sister Maria said this: you see, it's not walls that make us happy, but the Lord and Mary, help of Christians, who are with us and who love us. Courage, courage. And we perceive here Maria's concrete sense of concrete closeness of Jesus and Mary. Our Lady was Maria's powerful assistant. She felt her close by, ready to understand her need and come to her aid, as at the wedding of Cana. On June 25, 1915, there was a flood, unfortunately, in Varazze, and the water broke through the wall surrounding the house of the Salesian sisters, turning the courtyard into a stormy sea. Sister Maria, and the sister who was with her at the time, Sister Chiara, were about to drown. At that moment, Sister Maria remembered that she was to be a missionary and promised Our Lady that if she saved her younger brother Giacomino, who was at the front, she would become a missionary. Sister Maria had water up to her neck when she felt herself being thrown against the wall and her hands touched a wooden shutter. She climbed up and she was saved. Our Lady had truly made herself present, alive, and had helped her. Strengthened in her faith, she made up her mind. She wrote her letter of application to the missionary life. In that letter, she said this: the name of Mary, Help of Christians, was always on her lips, someone describing the episode, but in recounting the events of Varazze, I can assure you that during that story, the name of Mary, Help of Christians had a different flavor. You had to hear her. She gave it such an expression that it was moving. And so it's that presence, that conviction of Mary's presence, that empowered her strong apostolic action.
Queste foreste con il sangue per far germogliare I fiori della verità cristiana. Taglio perché il tempo è breve.
She's going to do some on-the-spot editing here.
Di Marina, che abbiamo già sentito, e anche di quando lei, l'abbiamo ascoltata, quando lei va negli shuar che le portano questa bambina che ha una pallottola vicino al cuore e lei dice, lo racconta ai parenti, dice: immaginatevi senza il necessario, con un temperino.
So a dramatic episode, there was a baby Shuar girl who had been shot, had a bullet in her, and she was destined to die, and it was Maria who intervened and saved her. She says, I was able to remove the bullet that was so close to her heart. And of course, this intervention would save the girl, won the trust of the entire Shuar people in favor of Maria.
Salto, ecco qua.
Okay, she's jumping ahead here. I'm trying to find where she is in the text.
Sul mio intervento. Riconoscere nella fede il primo passo di
The next heading, recognizing in faith the first step of the living Jesus.
In compagnia del Signore e della Madonna,
In the company of the Lord and Our Lady, in her mission in the jungle of 46 years, Sister Maria went with her nurse's bag and her rosary, educating children in the boarding school, in the school and in the oratory, caring for the sick. Sister Maria considered the events of history, the people that were sick, her duties as an educator and nurse, and her daily commitments as a call from God to respond with authentic love in authentic service.
C'è un testo che
A particular test is worth bringing into our reflection, which speaks about the first step of God towards Maria, a first step that precedes every other apostolic work.
dice che I fedeli che vivono nella preghiera, nel rapporto con il Signore, con la sua
She
parola,
says people who live in constant relationship with God's Word
gli eventi, gli incontri,
and live the events and encounters of every day
una chiamata,
as a call from God,
un primo passo di Dio,
as a first step of
e
God
dice,
towards them, says
queste persone, questi
these
credenti,
people, these
prima di
believers,
considerazione
before they
devono
act,
questo primo passo.
need to receive this first step from God.
Oh, come bisogna essere
She
docili
says this,
Dio, e non
oh, how docile we must be to the breath of God and not impose our own services on Him. St. Vincent de Paul accomplished a prodigious number of undertakings for the relief of the unfortunate, the education of children, the evangelization of abandoned souls, and the spiritual progress of religious persons. Yet he often said that before beginning any work, he always waited for Providence to take the lead. Nothing is as important as that absolute dependence on the divine will. But once God has clearly manifested His will, the soul no longer hesitates. It obeys gladly and gives of itself without counting the cost. It does not aspire to anything, neither glory, nor popularity, nor esteem, nor prestige. It seeks nothing, but it also fears nothing, since God makes His good pleasure known.
Che Dio fa conoscere il suo beneplacito. Proprio nel contesto della
In the context of this year where we're celebrating the 105th anniversary of the foundation of the Salesian Cooperators, I propose a commentary on a passage from the spiritual diary of Venerable Don Felice Canelli, died in 1977, and for whom I am the postulator of his cause. He says this: if he, St. Vincent de Paul, had a genius for organization, it derived from an intimate union with God. He prepared the plans for his manifold apostolate at the foot of the altar. The man of action was a man of contemplation, who studied before God in silent adoration, in confident conversation, justifying each of his projects. This: nature allows trees to take root before allowing them to bear fruit, and even this is done little by little. The things of God are done by themselves, and true wisdom consists in following providence step by step. Sister Maria was very much in this mindset and faith perspective. When she met people who were sick or needy in so many ways, in these people she recognized God's first step towards her. And so she moves from do whatever he tells you to what you've done to the least of my brothers or sisters, you did to me.
In fila quelli che sono stati gli eventi faticosi della vita di Troncati, proprio per
In my text, if you have time to read it more calmly, I've tried to put a list of the most dramatic moments in which we see at work Maria's absolute doing to the least brothers and sisters precisely what she understood God had asked her to do.
da parte dei coloni. L'epidemia di vaiolo nero nel 1933. L'incendio che distrusse la
a fire that destroyed the mission, a pandemic that killed so many people, the war between Peru and Ecuador, the violent epidemics between different groups, another pandemic in 55, her own serious illness in 55, and other pandemic a few years later in which so many kids died from the school of the Salesian Sisters. Then there was an earthquake.
Infine le crescenti ostilità
and then finally the violent hostility against the missions to the indigenous people from the colonial powers. Sister Maria sustained all of this. She endured so many things with prompt spirit and generous self-giving. She stayed with a Shuar family whose members were sick for an entire week, isolated with them, receiving only a glass of milk at the morning and the Holy Eucharist, saving all the food that came from the missions for the sick Shuar people. We can add to this list of sacrifices the many trips through the jungle to meet people in need of care. And so what can we say? The mysticism of charity in union with God, in prayer, in listening, and in God's words indicates that in order to understand God, we need to pray, we need to be retired, we need to be centered in prayer. It's not us who are the leaders of the evangelization work of God. We are only servants of that mission to which God calls us. We are loved, however, in this mission. The last point that I wish to make: young people as points of mediation with Jesus. In the life of Maria, young people were not just those who received her pastoral action, but they were for her the voice of God speaking to her, which voice called her to testify to his love.
Pensate a Marina Luzzi, pensate alla ragazza che viene operata e che gli dà il permesso di entrare nel territorio.
Various young people who were operated, who were sick, who were brought to healing through her interventions. And so she became a convincing witness to living faith in the active presence of Mary as help and in the loving presence of God that heals.
Vi racconto soltanto un episodio.
Allow me to recount one episode about how the boys, the young people, understood her deep commitment and how convincing she was as a witness to gospel love.
Esperienza di cristianesimo. Pensate, stava attraversando un fiume.
So she was crossing a river,
e di colpo il fiume si gonfiò.
and the river begins to flood. Sister Maria couldn't touch the bottom of the river. She calls on the help of multiple Christians, while the boy was struggling against the current.
A fare quella traversata, arrivati.
Somehow they managed to come across to safety,
Che avrebbe potuto perdere la sua madresita. Pochi giorni
and
dopo.
he was devastated that he came so close to losing his madrecita.
Suor Maria lottò con tutti i mezzi.
Sister Marie fought with all of her efforts to save this boy who had fallen sick after this adventure. He was saved, but he had told her, if I had died, I would have been happy and at peace, knowing that I had saved Sister Maria from dying in that flood.
Afferma il Rettor Maggiore.
The Rector Major says, yes, young people, if they have convincing witnesses, will be accompanied, will be encouraged in their seeking for the Lord. The young people in the mission encountered Jesus through Maria's presence, her courage, her dedication, in her actions, which she did with joy, fruit of her complete abandonment to the living God, which she felt concretely present to her.
Dove c'è una donna adulta che ricorda quando andavano la mattina al rosario alle 3 del mattino.
Another time, 3 a.m, some young women and Maria were going to the rosary prayer in the chapel, and they said, notwithstanding the fear of the night, we were always in joy, because we knew that with Maria we were in the presence of Jesus. And so she prayed with young people, and it was a convincing experience of Christ's presence.
Sor Maria scrive ai genitori.
She writes to her parents, I so need the help of God. The mission that God has asked of me is very demanding and difficult, but God has given me so much courage, and He will never abandon me. I feel Him so close to me. Jesus makes His presence known to me. How could I have ever had the force to do what I did? I'm so weak. How could I have had so much courage if it wasn't Jesus who gave it to me by walking with me? Monsignor Jose, who was leading her cause for canonization, says this: the servant of God presents herself to us as a woman gifted with a tremendous human lovability, a sense of love for all people, and a surprising flexibility in her interior life that allowed her to respond positively to so many different circumstances in life. All of this is united to a life of profound piety, nothing in pieces, one integrated life of faith. The Rector Major adds, like Mary at Cana, we educators are bound to witness to Christ to young people, not as an object, but as a freeing relationship. And I hope this insistence has come across in the elements of Maria's life that I've tried to share with you this afternoon.
E così, Suor Maria, con la sua fede,
Sister Maria, with her apostolic faith, has guided us. With the light of her faith, she has shown us that faith is a profound communion with the living Jesus, a personal relationship in prayer, a convocation, an active faith in the pages of history that is always waiting before we act the first act of God. He is the one who initiates the mediation and makes the ordinary extraordinary. With freedom and generous service, we can go forth and serve in joy, and this way quench the thirst of young people, even when they can't express that hunger, but some have a nostalgia for Him. If young people see in our eyes that we are in love with Jesus, they will see the light that will guide them. Let us conclude watching this 20-second video
che fa vedere Suor Maria che
that
sta pulendo le
shows
siringhe
Maria
nel
cleaning up
ospedale.
syringes in the hospital.
Pongo la vostra attenzione sugli
And just
occhi e sulle
notice her
mani, che
eyes
sono
and
gli
on her
occhi
gaze
dello sguardo di
as
una
we focus
sposa
on this.
innamorata.
This is the gaze of a woman in love
E
with
questo
her
è
beloved
bello
Jesus
dircelo
Christ.
perché
And it's
Nunzio
beautiful to
Cana
hear
sarà
this because
appunto un
the wedding
ambiente
feast of Cana,
di una
of course,
storia di
is a
carattere
story
nuziale.
of
Possiamo vedere questo video.
is a love story.
Con lo sguardo di Suor Maria Troncatti veramente sosteniamo la nostra inquietudine a vivere una vita salesiana, una vita di fede autentica. E poi voglio dirvi che all'entrata del teatro avete visto su un tavolo ci sono dei pieghevoli in diverse lingue, dei dépliant, delle immaginette con la preghiera e la reliquia di Santa Maria Troncatti e di Suor Madre Rosetta Marchese sono per voi, potete prendervi, e con questo vi dico grazie del vostro ascolto.
Grazie Sor Francesca per queste
Grazie, Sor Francesca.
parole così sincere, profonde. Raccontate
Thank you,
come-
sister, for this testimony.
Ecco, facciamo venire anche Don Juan Luis.
We call Father Juan Luis to the podium. Thank you, dear sister. A very rich and moving testimony.
Perché hai fatto una comunicazione comunicando. Io vedevo gli occhi di Francesca.
I see in Francesca's eyes some of that same intense love that was present in the eyes of Sister Maria Troncatti. And so we have the text, we can read it at leisure. You have left us some homework, which is to deepen the reading, the study, the appreciation of the passages, which because of time constraints we had to skim through today. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
Ringraziamento. E approfitto il momento, un minuto. Ieri abbiamo
Yesterday,
vissuto tutti
we all experienced a beautiful moment of prayer, a missionary prayer.
mostrato
And during that time, we saw many images and drawings from various
grandi missionari, alcuni
heroes of our Salesian family, great missionaries.
santificati.
Some are already saints and some are remembered with much appreciation. Among them is Saint Maria Troncatti. And so these images of these saints, if you
Stanno raccolti in questa
would like a set, are collected in this package that our Office for the Postulation of the Causes of Saints has compiled.
alcun anno fa, no?
They were done a few years ago,
3 o 4 anni, mi sembra.
3 or 4 years ago.
Ne abbiamo qui,
We have some copies of these here.
bueno, l'aereo può sostenere anche qualcun chilo di più. Non dico per noi
If you'd like to have a set, make yourself known and we'll get a set to you.
o i vostri gruppi o le
They
vostre
could be used to animate different prayer moments or formation sessions in your province.
verificare ieri, ne abbiamo 10-12 esemplari che potete
There are
chiedere.
10 or 12 sets there that you can pick up in reception.
Grazie.
Grazie Don Juan
Grazie.
Luis, grazie Sor Francesca. Beh, direi che è ora di continuare il nostro percorso.
Sì, però prima dobbiamo chiamare sul palco i volontari del museo. Venite, venite. Vi vedo.
Un applauso per i
Venite,
volontari che stanno arrivando.
Tutti. È necessario, quindi dovete venire. Che ci accompagneranno letteralmente nella prossima esperienza al Cotolengo. Nel frattempo che arrivino, non siate timidi, devo dare un avviso ai preti che concelebreranno la messa al Cotolengo, di portare con sé il camice. Detto questo, venite da qui. Bene, guardiamoli attentamente, che sono proprio loro le persone che ci accompagneranno.
Un altro grande applauso per loro.
Okay.
Bene, allora ci ritroviamo entro 10 minuti dal cancello. Praticamente dobbiamo uscire tutti dal cancello sulla destra, appena uscite dal teatro sulla destra, su via Sassari, ok? La partenza prevista è 17:40, possiamo fare 45? Dalla regia cosa dicono? Sì, 45, ok? Quindi 9 minuti di pausa, bagno, chi deve andare, e poi si parte subito per il Cotolengo.
Grazie, ci vediamo domani.
Vagando por malos caminos, llegó un hombre alto, vestido de negro, creo que fue el destino.